Hello, beautiful people. It's Lulu, and this is episode 54 of the Lulu Essey podcast. If you've ever felt guilty for just trying to survive instead of thriving, or wondered why you can't seem to heal fast enough, this episode is for you. Today we're talking about the difference between coping and healing, and why both matter more than you might think. This is about understanding where you are so you can actually support yourself instead of fighting yourself. This is not about making coping wrong. This is not about rushing you out of survival mode into some imaginary thriving mode. This is important because when we resist where we are, we stay stuck. When we accept where we are, we create the possibility for movement. Please share this episode. Send it to people in your life who might be struggling to understand why they're not better yet. Drop it in a group chat, post it somewhere, because I think a lot of us need permission to stop fighting ourselves and start accepting ourselves and where we are at in our lives. Let's talk about coping and healing. It is important to get clear on what the words coping and healing actually mean. Not the clinical definitions, but what they look like in real life. Coping is about survival. It's about getting through. It's about the strategies we use when our capacity is limited and we just need to make it to the end of the day, the end of the week, the end of whatever we're in the middle of. Coping can look like doing the minimum because that's all you got. It can look like using whatever tools help you not to fall apart, avoiding things that require too much emotional energy, just getting through. And there is nothing wrong with that. Healing, on the other hand, is different. It's the deeper work of understanding ourselves and creating sustainable change. It is when you have the capacity to look underneath your coping strategies, to explore patterns, to sit with uncomfortable emotions long enough to understand them. Some people might call it growth or processing or inner work. Whatever language resonates for you is fine. But for this episode, I'll use healing because it captures that you're doing more than just managing. You're transforming. Healing does not mean you're broken. Healing requires more space, emotional space, mental space, often physical space too. It requires energy you might not have when you're in coping mode. Both are valid. Both are necessary at different times. The problem isn't coping. The problem is when we don't know which mode we're in, or when we shame ourselves for being in coping mode. Some of you know exactly which mode you're in right now. You can feel it. But for those of you who aren't sure, here are some questions that might help you figure it out. These questions may indicate that you're in coping mode. Am I just trying to make it through right now? Is my primary goal stability, not transformation? Am I running on empty? Am I using strategies that help me function, even if they're not addressing the root issue? Does the thought of healing work feel overwhelming or impossible right now? If the answer to any or all or a combination of these questions is yes, then you are in coping mode. And maybe that looks like ordering takeout because cooking feels impossible, Maybe it looks like avoiding certain conversations because you just don't have the bandwidth. Maybe it's binging Netflix to turn your brain off. That's coping. And again, there's nothing wrong with it. Here are some questions that might indicate you're ready for healing mode. Do I have some space, emotional, mental, or physical, to look deeper? Am I ready to explore patterns instead of just managing symptoms? Can I sit with discomfort long enough to understand what it's trying to tell me? Do I have support, whether that's therapy, a trusted friend, or just stability in my life? Am I noticing that my coping strategies aren't working as well as they used to? If the answer to any, all, or a combination of these questions is yes, then you are in healing mode. And you don't get extra points for being in healing mode. And you're not failing if you're in coping mode. You're just in different seasons, and each season requires different things from you. What happens when we fight against being in coping mode? Because I think this is where so many of us get stuck. If you're Googling or asking AI, am I coping or healing at 2 a.m., or wondering why I can't just get over this, let me suggest what might be really going on. We live in a culture that is completely obsessed with growth, with transformation, with healing, with thriving. Everywhere we look, the message is the same. Don't just survive, thrive. Stop coping and start growing. Heal yourself, level up. And I'm not against growth. Obviously, I have a whole podcast about mental fitness, transformation, and self-love. But here's what that constant messaging does. It makes us feel like coping is shameful, like we're doing something wrong if we're just trying to get through. So what happens when we do that? What happens when we add shame on top of survival? When we judge ourselves for not being further along? When we feel guilty for using coping strategies instead of doing the real work? When we do this, we push ourselves to heal when we don't have the capacity for it. And that resistance, that resisting our current reality, that lack of acceptance of where we are, it comes at a significant cost. It costs us emotionally because we're carrying shame on top of whatever we're struggling with. It costs us psychologically because we're creating an internal war instead of internal support. It costs us spiritually because we're rejecting our own humanity, our own limitations, our own very real need for survival mode, sometimes. And it costs us in terms of our mental health because resistance keeps us stuck. When we're at war with ourselves, we cannot move forward. When we are unable to accept where we are at, we stay stuck. The anxiety about being in coping mode becomes its own burden. We use precious energy judging ourselves for coping instead of just letting ourselves cope. I'd really like you to hear this. If you're in coping mode right now, that is not a problem to fix. That's information about what you have capacity for. And the most loving thing you can do is honor that, accept that, instead of fighting against it. There is so much power in accepting where we are and not making it wrong. Actually, that's where all of our power is, in the willingness to surrender, to accept, to start fighting ourselves. I think the struggle is when we convince ourselves or we believe that accepting where we are at means we are giving up, when in fact it's the exact opposite. How do we actually support ourselves in these different modes? If you're in coping mode, give yourself permission to use whatever helps you get through without criticism, without judgment. Maybe that's more screen time than usual. Maybe it's simpler meals. Maybe it's saying no to things you'd normally say yes to. Lower your expectations for transformation right now. This is not the season for deep healing work. This is the season for survival, and survival is enough. And here's something I need to be honest with you about. I find it really hard to accept when I'm in coping mode. Really hard. Those old neural pathways kick in. The ones that tell me coping is letting myself down, that it's a sign of my weakness, that I need to get out of this mode as fast as possible. It's the same pattern I have with rest. I resist it often, even though I need it. What I've learned through experience is this. Resisting coping mode just holds me there longer. When I fight where I'm at, when I try and force myself into healing mode before I have the capacity for it, I stay stuck. And when I let go, when I surrender, when I acknowledge with self-love where I'm at, it loosens the grip. It helps me accept my coping mode without making it wrong. And here's what's tricky about this. You have to be mindful that you're not accepting just to get out of coping mode faster, because that's still resistance in disguise. That's still trying to control the process. I've learned to trust these states are temporary, that the more I let go and accept, the more I surrender to where I am, the better it is for me. And then, and only then, can I start to see possibilities I can't see when I'm fighting. Celebrate that you're still here, that you're showing up, that you're doing what you can with what you have. Coping mode is temporary. It does not last for forever. You won't be here always. This is where you may need to be right now. Honor that without apology. And if you're in healing mode, create space for uncomfortable emotions. Don't rush through them. Don't try and fix them immediately. Let yourself be present long enough for them to teach you something. Seek support that goes deeper than crisis managing. Maybe that's therapy. Maybe it's a trusted friend who can hold space for the messy stuff. Maybe it's journaling or other practices that help you process. Be gentle with the pace. Healing is not linear. Some days you'll feel like you're making progress. Other days you'll feel like you started right back where you were. Both are part of the process. Trust it even when it feels messy. Healing often looks like things are getting worse before they get better. That's okay. It's part of it. Here's what I invite you to consider. You can't force the transition from coping to healing. You can't push or hustle or discipline your way there. The bridge between coping and healing is built on acceptance. Allow me to say that again, because I'd like you to remember this. The bridge between coping and healing is built on acceptance, not force. When we stop resisting where we are, when we stop fighting the fact that we're in coping mode, something shifts. The resistance begins to release, and in that release, you create space. Space for awareness, space for gentleness, space for the possibility of something different. You'll know when you're ready to move from coping to healing, when it starts to feel natural, when you notice you have just a bit more capacity, when your coping strategies start to feel less necessary, when you find yourself curious about what's underneath instead of just managing what's on the surface. But you cannot force that readiness. You can only create the conditions for it by accepting where you are right now. Wherever you are today, coping or healing or somewhere in between, I want you to know you're exactly where you need to be. There's no rush. There's no shoulds. There's just you doing the best you can with what you have. And that is enough. It is more than enough. It's everything. Please share this episode with people in your life who are feeling stuck or struggling to accept the season they are in. Rate, review, follow the Lulu Essey podcast so we can stay connected and build a community of people who love and support each other. I'd be so grateful. You can watch this episode on my YouTube channel, where you'll also find moments of insight in all my shorts. What comes from the heart reaches the heart. And today, this comes with acceptance, with gentleness, and with the deep knowing that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is stop fighting ourselves and just let ourselves be, to surrender and to remind ourselves that acceptance does not mean we are giving up. Until next week, this comes straight from my heart to yours.